Assuming wealth is not denial. It is a new identity. And here's the line most people don't want to admit. Ignoring bills is fear, not faith, not Sabbath. Fear. Because let's be honest, the bills still show up. The bank balance still looks the way it looks. The email subject line still says payment due. And if you're like most people, your body reacts before your mind even finishes the thought. A tight chest, a quick scan for the number. That subtle panic that tries to decide your future in 3 seconds. And this is where so many people get stuck. They try to feel rich while their nervous system is bracing for impact. They whisper affirmations while opening the banking app with shaking hands. They say, "I'm abundant," while mentally calculating what can be delayed, what can be avoided, what can be sacrificed. So this video is not going to tell you to ignore the bills, because ignoring bills is fear. It's going to show you how to look straight at reality, without letting it name you. Because the moment you use money pressure as proof of who you are, you leave the state. And the moment you leave the state, everything stays exactly where it was. If you've been trying to feel rich while panicking, this is why it hasn't moved. This is not a motivational talk, and it's not another spiritual performance where you're asked to ignore the 3D and hope for the best. What you're going to get here is clarity, practical clarity, without killing the depth of the law, because there is a huge difference between assuming a state and coping through denial. Denial looks spiritual, but it's still fear, and fear always keeps you in not yet. Most people never learn that difference, and that's why money stays emotionally charged, even when the concepts are understood. So the goal of this video is very precise. It is to move you out of survival mode spirituality, out of pretending, forcing, or suppressing what you feel, and into an actual state of assumption that remains stable while life is happening. Not when everything is calm, not when the bills are imaginary, but when they are real, present, and visible. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what to do today. Not in theory, not in a perfect future version of yourself, but in the moment when money pressure hits. You'll know how to respond without collapsing inwardly, without lying to yourself, and without turning the law into an emotional escape. This is about keeping the state while facing reality, not avoiding it. The first and most common mistake in this space is confusing faith with pretending. You've heard the phrases, ignore the 3D, act like it's already paid, don't look at the bank account. Just persist and don't react. On the surface, these sound spiritual. They sound disciplined. They sound aligned. But for most people, they create something very different. They create stress, because ignoring reality is not the same as transcending it, and acting as if, while your body is in fear, is not assumption, it is performance. When you tell yourself not to look, not to think, not to acknowledge what's there, you don't exit the problem. You stay in it, but now you're tense. Your nervous system knows the bill exists. Your body knows the pressure is real. So while your mouth is saying it's already done, your system is bracing, monitoring, and waiting. That split is exhausting. This is why so many people feel drained by techniques. They are not practicing faith. They are managing anxiety. And anxiety is not power. Pretending something isn't happening does not move you into a higher state. It keeps you in a reactive relationship with lack, because the bill is still the reference point. The fear is still the reference point. You're just trying not to look at it. And here's the part most people miss. Denial is still a relationship with lack, and that's why the thumbnail is blunt. Ignoring bills is fear, because avoidance is not neutrality. It's a reaction. You don't deny what you feel neutral about. You don't avoid what has no power over you. Avoidance itself reveals importance. When money truly loses its grip on your identity, you don't need to hide from it. You don't need to suppress reactions. You don't need to act. You simply respond differently. The moment you must force calm, force faith, or force indifference, you are no longer in assumption. You are in resistance, and resistance always feels heavy. Faith is not fragile. If it requires constant guarding, distraction, or suppression, it is not faith. It is effort dressed up as belief. This is why ignoring the 3D backfires for so many people. Not because the law doesn't work, but because denial keeps you oriented toward what you're trying to escape. And whatever you're oriented toward remains central. That's the mistake. And once you see it clearly, the solution becomes much simpler than you were taught to believe. Let's clean this up once and for all. There is a real difference between pretending and assuming, and confusing the two is where most people sabotage themselves. Pretending is emotional theater. It's saying everything is fine, but while fear is running quietly underneath, it's smiling on the surface while the body stays tense. It's repeating phrases to convince yourself, not because you're convinced. Pretending requires effort. It needs monitoring. It needs suppression. You have to keep checking yourself to make sure you're staying positive. And the moment you stop performing, the anxiety comes rushing back. That's not power. That's exhaustion. Assuming, on the other hand, is a position, not a mood, not a performance, a position of consciousness. When you assume wealth, you don't need to fight reality. You don't need to deny numbers. You don't need to pretend the bill isn't on the table. You simply stop letting it define who you are. Assumption is calm because it's settled. It doesn't argue with facts. It just refuses to worship them. And this is the sentence you need to hear clearly. You can acknowledge facts without worshipping them. A bill is a fact. A balance is a fact. A deadline is a fact. But facts are not identities. They are not prophecies. They are not final. Pretending says, I can't look or I'll lose the state. Assuming says, I can look and remain myself. If you can't look, you're not in power, you're in fear. That's the difference. When you are pretending, money controls your nervous system. When you are assuming, money becomes information. Information does not threaten you. Information does not collapse you. Information does not rush you into panic, it simply exists. And this is why assuming wealth feels quieter than people expect. There's no dramatic confidence, no forced certainty, no emotional high, just stability. You don't need to convince yourself you're wealthy. You begin responding like someone who is not internally threatened by money. That's assumption. And once you feel that difference in your body, once calm replaces effort, you'll immediately know whether you've been pretending or whether you finally stepped into the state. Here's the shift that changes everything. Bills are weather, not identity. A bill arrives the same way rain does. It shows up. It's measurable. It affects the day. But it does not redefine who you are. You don't become poor because a bill arrived, just like you don't become broken because it rained. Weather describes conditions. It does not describe essence. Most people collapse these two. They treat conditions as conclusions. They let a number tell a story about them. And the moment that happens, the state is lost. When rain comes, you don't panic and say, this is my life now. It will never be dry again. You adjust. You respond. You move differently, without losing your sense of self. Money is the same. A bill is not a sentence. It is not a verdict. It is not a prophecy. It is information about the current environment. The problem begins when the environment becomes personal. When the number on the screen starts answering questions it was never meant to answer. Questions like, who am I? Am I safe? Am I failing? Is this working? That's when pressure turns into identity. But when you see money as weather, something shifts internally. You stop arguing with it. You stop dramatizing it. You stop resisting it. You also stop obeying it emotionally. You don't deny the rain. You don't worship it either. You acknowledge it and remain yourself. This is where real assumption lives, not in pretending the storm isn't there, but in refusing to let the storm decide who you are. And this is the sentence that stabilizes everything. The bill is a number. Your state is a choice. The number can exist. The choice is internal. You can read the statement, pay attention, take action if needed, without collapsing into the version of you who feels small, rushed, or defeated. That version is optional. Weather passes, states persist, and the moment you stop letting temporary conditions define permanent identity, you step back into power, quietly, naturally, without force. This is where Neville's teaching becomes very practical. When he spoke about a state, he wasn't talking about mood, he wasn't talking about emotion, and he definitely wasn't talking about pretending to feel something you don't. A state is simply a position you occupy. It's the place you're living from mentally, emotionally, and reactively, especially when you're not trying. A state answers questions automatically. How do you respond when something unexpected happens? How do you talk to yourself when pressure appears? How do you interpret delays, numbers, or obstacles? Those reactions reveal the state far more honestly than affirmations ever will. Neville was very clear about this, even if people gloss over it. You don't get results because you say the right words. You get results because you occupy a position long enough for it to feel normal. And this is the part that removes all mysticism. Naturalness is the indicator. Not excitement, not certainty, not emotional charge, naturalness. When something feels natural to you, you stop checking it. You stop questioning it. You stop asking if it's working. You don't maintain what feels normal. You live from it. This is why people misunderstand assumption. They think assuming wealth means feeling rich all the time. But wealth as a state is not a feeling. It's a baseline. It's the absence of inner panic around money. It's the absence of urgency. It's the absence of identity collapse when numbers appear. That's it. When Neville said to live in the end, he didn't mean live in fantasy. He meant live from the identity for whom the end is normal. And here's the key sentence. What feels normal becomes visible. Not what feels intense. Not what feels dramatic. Not what feels spiritually impressive. Normal. Think about the things in your life that came easily. They didn't come with obsession. They didn't come with constant checking. They didn't come with fear of loss. They came because they matched a state you already occupied. You didn't need to convince yourself they were possible. They already felt expected. That's how states work. A state is not created by force, it's entered through acceptance. And once you accept a state, your reactions begin to change without effort. You notice it in small ways first. You don't rush as much, you don't spiral as quickly. You don't interpret every delay as failure. Not because you're trying to stay positive, but because the identity you're occupying doesn't require those reactions anymore. This is why naturalness is such an honest test. If you're constantly reminding yourself who you are, you haven't settled into the state yet. You don't need reminders to be yourself. When wealth is assumed as a state, you don't wake up every morning thinking, I must stay in the wealthy mindset today. You simply respond to life differently. Calmer decisions, clearer priorities, less emotional charge around money conversations. Those changes are subtle, but they are decisive, because consciousness does not respond to what you want. It responds to what you are being. And being always expresses itself through what feels normal to you. If struggle feels normal, life reflects struggle. If calm authority feels normal, life reflects cooperation. This is not moral. It's mechanical. So the work is not to force a feeling. It's to gently, consistently return to a position until it feels like home. And once a state feels like home, reality has no choice but to show you where you are standing. That's Neville's point. Stripped of mystery, stripped of fantasy, and placed back into lived experience. Because what feels normal becomes visible. There is a loop that keeps people stuck longer than anything else. It looks harmless. It even looks responsible. But it quietly reinforces the very state you're trying to leave. It's the habit of checking the bank balance, checking the payment status, checking for signs, checking timelines, checking messages, checking to see if something shifted. On the surface, it feels practical, but internally it's doing something very specific. Every time you check, you're asking a question, and that question is always the same. Has it happened yet? That question belongs to a very clear identity. The identity of the one who is waiting. You're not checking because you need information. You're checking because you're unsure of your position. And this is the part that's uncomfortable to see. You're not checking the bank. You're checking your identity. You're asking, am I still the one who doesn't have? Am I still behind? Am I still waiting? And the moment you ask, you step back into the state of not yet. The law doesn't hear your affirmations. It hears your posture. Checking is a posture. It says, I'm here and what I want is over there. It says, I'm monitoring the distance. It says, I'll believe it when I see it. Checking isn't the enemy. Obsessive checking is. And ignoring isn't strength either. Ignoring bills is fear. Someone who feels secure doesn't check constantly. They check when needed, then move on. Someone who feels uncertain keeps returning, hoping the screen will relieve the tension inside. And the relief never lasts. Because the act of checking reactivates the same question. And the question recreates the same state. Waiting. This is why people feel like they're doing everything right, yet nothing stabilizes. They affirm, they visualize, they let go, but then they check. And each check quietly resets the state back to lack. Not because the number is bad, but because the identity doing the checking is still oriented toward absence. This is the loop. Hope, check. Disappointment or temporary relief, check again. And all the while the identity of the waiting self is being rehearsed. The moment you see this, you don't need to fight the habit. You don't need to shame yourself. You just need to recognize what checking actually means. It's not curiosity, it's not responsibility, it's a signal that the state has not yet felt normal. And once you understand that, the solution isn't to stop checking completely. It's to stop letting checking decide who you are. Because when the state shifts, the urge to check weakens naturally. Not by discipline, by irrelevance, and that's when movement begins. There is a tension around money that most people never name clearly. They think the problem is desire, so they try to reduce it, transcend it, spiritualize it away. But desire is not the issue. Need is. Desire by itself is healthy. It's movement, it's expansion, it's life expressing itself. Need, on the other hand, is anxious. It contracts the body. It narrows perception. It turns money into authority. This is where the confusion happens. People hear "don't need it" and interpret that as "don't want it." So they suppress desire while need stays active underneath. They tell themselves they're detached, but their nervous system is still pleading. Wanting can exist without destabilizing you. Needing cannot, because needing defines the state. Needing says, "I am incomplete until this arrives." Needing says, "I cannot be settled without proof." Needing says, "My sense of self depends on the outcome," and the law responds to that position, not the words around it. This is why someone can desire wealth calmly and see movement begin, while another person repeats spiritual language endlessly and stays stuck. The difference is posture. Here is the sentence that realigns everything. You can want wealth without kneeling to it. Kneeling is what happens when money becomes the source of safety, when a number decides your mood, when a bill decides your worth, when a delay decides your faith. Desire doesn't kneel, need does. When you kneel, you give authority away, and whatever you give authority to begins to govern your inner world. A wealthy state does not remove desire, it removes desperation. It allows you to say, "Yes, I want more," without collapsing into, "I cannot be okay until I get it." That difference is subtle and massive. You can want wealth while remaining upright internally, breathing, thinking clearly, making decisions without panic. And the moment that happens, money stops being a judge and starts becoming a tool. This is why desire doesn't block manifestation. Dependence does. When money is wanted, you move toward it naturally. When money is needed, you orbit it anxiously. Orbiting never arrives. It just circles. Once you feel this distinction in your body, you stop fighting desire and start releasing the grip. And when the grip releases, the state stabilizes. Not because you forced detachment, but because you reclaimed authority. You didn't stop wanting wealth. You stopped kneeling to it. And that's where real movement begins. Now let's bring this down to the exact moment where everything usually collapses. The bill is there. The number is real. The due date is visible. This is where most people either panic, wed, or pretend. But there is a third option, and it's the one that actually changes the state. Step 1. Acknowledge the fact without collapsing the self. Read the bill. Look at the number. Notice the date, and then pause. Do not attach a story to it. Do not let it answer questions about who you are. Do not let it rush your nervous system into identity. Say, internally and calmly, "This is a fact, not a definition." That single pause is powerful, because it separates information from identity. The wealthy state does not disappear when facts appear. It only disappears when you let facts name you. Step 2. Choose the response of the wealth self, not the response of fear, not the response of avoidance, the response of someone who feels internally resourced. Ask a very grounded question. How would I respond to this if I were not threatened by it? Not magically, not emotionally, practically. The wealth self does not freeze. It does not dramatize. It does not spiral. It stays upright. That posture matters more than the outcome. Step 3. Take a small, real-world action without losing the state. This is where people think spirituality and practicality conflict. They don't. You might pay what you can, you might negotiate. The wealth self doesn't avoid the bill. It faces it without panic. None of that means you left the state. Avoiding action is not faith. Avoiding responsibility is not assumption. And this is the sentence that corrects everything. Wealth doesn't avoid responsibility. It embodies it. Handling a bill calmly is not a betrayal of the law. It is evidence of a different identity. You are not going back to the old self because you took care of something. You are confirming the new self by how you take care of it. Panic-based action collapses the state. Calm action stabilizes it. The law does not ask you to deny life. It asks you to meet life from a different position. So when the bill is there, you don't fight it. You don't worship it. And you don't disappear from it. You stand, you acknowledge, you choose, you act. And then, this is important, you return inwardly to the same settled position. No self-judgment, no replay. No, did I mess it up? You handled it as the person you are becoming. That is not coping. That is occupancy. And that is how the bridge begins to form. Quietly, practically, without drama. When anxiety hits, this is not the moment to explain the law to yourself. It's not the moment to visualize scenes, and it's definitely not the moment to argue with fear. You need something shorter, cleaner, grounded. So here is a simple script you can use in the moment, exactly as it is. Say it slowly, not to convince yourself, but to reposition yourself. This is a number, not a threat. Avoiding it is fear. I choose steadiness. That's it. No drama. No affirmations about millions. No spiritual performance. Just enough language to interrupt the spiral and bring you back into the body. You don't repeat this to force belief. You repeat it until your system settles. If you need to say it once, say it once. If you need to say it 5 times, say it 5 times. Repetition here is not about manifestation. It's about regulation. And regulation is what remembers the state. There is another mistake that quietly keeps people stuck. It's misusing the idea of Sabbath. Rest was never meant to be anesthesia, but that's how many people use it. They hear enter the Sabbath and translate it as do nothing, avoid everything, disconnect from reality. If your Sabbath is just avoiding the bill, it isn't Sabbath, it's fear. So they stop engaging, they stop responding, they stop handling life, not from peace, but from avoidance. This is the difference you need to see clearly. Rest brings expansion. Freeze brings contraction. When Sabbath is real, you feel lighter, clearer, more present. When it's avoidance, you feel smaller, numb, disconnected. And here's the line that exposes it. Real Sabbath makes you lighter, not smaller. If rest makes you afraid to open emails, afraid to look at numbers, afraid to make decisions, that's not Sabbath, that's paralysis dressed up as spirituality. Neville never taught withdrawal from life. He taught withdrawal from inner struggle. Sabbath is the absence of inner argument, not the absence of responsibility. When people freeze, they tell themselves they're trusting, but internally they're bracing, and bracing is not rest. If you feel relief only when you avoid, the state hasn't stabilized yet. Real rest allows engagement without collapse. So what replaces all of this? Not a technique, not a ritual, an identity. Wealth, as Neville pointed to it, is not something you chase, it's something you are positioned as. And that position shows up through self-concept. Here are 3 sentences that define it, not as affirmations but as descriptions. I am the kind of person money stays with. I make calm decisions. I handle life from fullness. Notice what these do. They don't talk about outcomes. They don't mention timelines. They don't argue with circumstances. They describe how you operate. And once this identity is accepted, reactions change automatically. You pause instead of panic. You respond instead of freeze. You think instead of spiral. Not because you're trying to be spiritual, but because the old reactions no longer fit who you are. This is how self-concept works. You don't stop bad habits by fighting them. They fall away when they no longer match identity. A wealthy self does not mean reckless optimism. It means internal stability. It means money is no longer the authority in the room. When this autoconcito settles, you don't need reminders. Your body knows how to respond. And when reactions change, circumstances eventually follow, not as reward but as reflection. That's the correction. Not pretending, not freezing, not avoiding, but becoming someone for whom calm, responsibility, and fullness are normal. This is where people either mature or fall back into fantasy. Neville used the phrase bridge of incidents very deliberately. Not miracle, not jump, not explosion, a bridge. And bridges are crossed step by step. When your state changes, life doesn't usually respond with fireworks. It responds with rearrangement, an idea you wouldn't have had before, a conversation that suddenly feels obvious, a message you finally answer, a decision you stop postponing. Nothing dramatic, nothing mystical, just movement. And here's the sentence that keeps people grounded. Most bridges look ordinary while they're happening. This is why so many people miss them. They expect wealth to arrive as relief, as shock, as emotional payoff. But bridges don't arrive as rewards, they arrive as options. And the only thing that allows you to recognize them is the state you're standing in. From panic, you miss them. From avoidance, you ignore them. From calm authority, you take them naturally. This is why nothing needs to be forced. When the state is stable, you don't need signs. You notice opportunities because you're no longer contracted. The bridge doesn't drag you across. It simply appears where you're already standing, and the moment you stop waiting for magic, life becomes responsive. Let's make this concrete. Example 1. A high bill arrives. The old response: panic, avoidance, identity collapse. Thoughts spiral. Sleep is disturbed, nothing changes. The new response: the bill is read. The pause happens. Identity stays intact. A call is made. A plan is set. Pressure drops. Same bill. Different state. Different outcome. Example 2. Debt or installment pressure. The old response: shame, freezing, hoping something external rescues you. Time passes. Stress grows. The new response: clear-eyed acknowledgement, calm negotiation, self-respect intact, no self-punishment, no spiritual bypass, just dignity. That dignity changes how people respond to you, and that response changes what becomes possible next. Example 3. Extra income, not a miracle, not a windfall. An idea surfaces, a conversation opens, a side opportunity appears. The old self dismisses it. Too tired, too overwhelmed, too doubtful. The new state recognizes it as a bridge. Nothing heroic, just participation. And participation compounds. This is how wealth moves in. Not loudly, not suddenly, but consistently. Now let this slow down. This part is not about learning, it's about returning. If money pressure is present right now, don't push it away. Just listen. Acknowledge. There is pressure. No story, no judgment, just acknowledgement. Then choose. I choose not to collapse into this. Not forcefully, gently, and then return. Return to the body, return to the breath. Return to the position you've practiced. Acknowledge, choose, return. Nothing more. You don't need to fix your future in this moment. You don't need certainty, you don't need proof. You only need to remain yourself while life is moving. Let the number exist. Let the sensation pass. Let the state stay. Acknowledge, choose, return. This is not giving up control. This is reclaiming it. And every time you come back to this position, the grip loosens. Not because money disappeared, but because it stopped defining you. Listen to this section whenever the pressure hits, not to escape reality, but to meet it without shrinking. That is assumption in motion. That is wealth as identity. And from here, life knows how to respond. So let's bring this home, simply and clearly. When money pressure appears, you do 3 things. First, you acknowledge the facts. You don't deny them. You don't dramatize them, you see what's there. Second, you do not collapse your identity. A number does not decide who you are. A bill does not define your future. You remain yourself. Third, you act from the wealth self, calm, grounded, responsible, without panic. Not perfect action, aligned action. This is not about ignoring life. It's about meeting life from a different position. Because wealth is not a performance. It's not pretending nothing is happening. And it's not waiting for pressure to disappear before you feel settled. It's returning to yourself while reality is still unfolding. And this is the truth everything in this video points to. Assuming wealth isn't pretending. It's returning. Remember, ignoring bills is fear. Assuming wealth is calm identity. Before you go, answer this honestly in the comments. Just one word is enough. When money pressure hits, what do you do first? Check, panic, or breathe? Write it exactly as it is for you. No explanations, no stories. And if you felt your body settle at any point in this video, come back and listen again when the pressure shows up. This isn't content to rush through, it's something to return to.